Welcome to Tonai Talks, and today we're going to be talking about surviving the 6 week summer holiday. My name is Dr. Keris Rees. I'm the Senior Specialist Educational Psychologist for Neath Talbot Local Authority, and today I have with me Caitlin Davis, our Assistant Educational Psychologist, who has been exploring and investigating how to survive the 6 weeks holiday, which is very important at this time of year.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Caitlin. And don't forget, on the screen, you can see the QR code there. We have parents who are listening live and will be able to ask questions at the end. So in order for you to join us live next time, please do scan that code. You'll have a list then of all the different Tonai Talks that we have coming up. And also you can access our pre-recorded Tonai Talks and any other Tonai Talks that we have done for you to listen to on our YouTube channel. Thank you. So, Caitlin, the summer holidays. I know most of us really look forward to the summer holidays. I know I do.
Yeah.
But let's have a chat. What does that mean for our parents? I know that obviously we've spent the September to July, with our kids, getting them to school, doing their homework, doing that usual routine of getting up on the Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, doing school, weekends, and now all of a sudden it's the summer holidays. It all sounds so nice, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I think this is something that we kind of have this quite romanticized idea of in our heads about the summer holidays, be it if we're a child or a pet, well, maybe not so much as a parent, but, it is kind of that many, the 6 weeks of fun. We're hoping for, lovely weather. We're hoping to do lots of activities. We know that that's not always the case. So, yeah, it can definitely be something that we spend a lot of time building up to. And as a result of that, building up our expectations as well, which can be a little bit tricky.
So tell me then, so what is it about the summer holidays that families can find it so challenging?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I suppose there's two different kind of experiences, from two different perspectives in the family. So I'll start with the children. So I think in terms of building those expectations, I think this is perhaps, the group that's kind of, impacted by that the most because, they're kind of hanging on, they're clinging on ready for, the summer holidays. We think of it as being this like time of fun and freedom. However, what we don't talk as much about is how kind of difficult and emotional and challenging it can be for children during this time. So the first thing we kind of have is there's this element of this loss of structure and routine. Children, especially younger ones, or those with perhaps neurodiverse profiles, often feel more secure with predictable routines. In fact, I go beyond that and say any child, having that predictability, that consistency of what's going to happen next, often allows children to feel really, really safe. However, and it gives them a sense of control as well, in the sense of, they know step by step. However, in summer holidays, this is somewhat kind of removed, again, it feeds into that idea of it being fun and stuff like that, but this predictability, this routine can be taken away as part of the summer holidays. And a lot of children can feel anxious or restless or overwhelmed. They can lose like a sense of purpose.
Yeah, because I think the main, structure and routine I talked about was about, the Monday to Friday, that, getting up at the regular times, doing the same stuff over and over again. That's how we kind of feel. It's like mundane, isn't it? But actually, our children do get a lot of sense of security from that mundaneness and the regularness of it.
Absolutely.
As much as they will be desperately wanting the summer holidays to start, actually, they will be missing so much of that routine, which schools are brilliant at providing, aren't they? Because it starts at a certain time on certain days, the bell ringing for certain lessons and break times, they eat at specific times. And we talked about like that circadian rhythm, which means about getting up at, particular times, irregularly, but also eating regularly and having those outdoor experiences as well. Because we know that break times, they're all structured, aren't they? They're all to a timetable. And I think that's what you mentioned in there is about some holidays just being, well, there's no routine.
Endless possibilities, isn't it?
What time does the kids get up in the morning? Nobody has a structure.
No,
really.
and that's what, in that 9 to 5, like I said, the children, they know where they are, they know what they're going to be doing, they know what life is going to look like.
They even know what to wear.
They even know what to wear, they know that they're going to see their friend, and that's something we'll touch upon a little bit later. Their life is very predictable. And even though at the time, they complain that it's boring, actually when that predictability is taken away and you have that endless possibility, that can be quite intimidating. It can be quite disorientating in the sense of, well, actually I've got all this time, I want to do all these things, but I'm a child and I don't know, and it's a little bit scary, and particularly maybe with our littler ones who haven't experienced the summer holidays. We know perhaps our older teenagers, yes, they'll grieve the loss of routine, but they'll have a general idea of what summer holidays are going to look like, and they'll have, perhaps our year 10s and 11s, they might not be very good at it, but they do have the ability to start to implement their own like little mini routines, but our younger ones, they're very much dictated by the world around them, and that kind of, like I said, that 9 to 5, day to day, Monday to Friday, guidebook to life, if you will, it gets taken away.
And this is the thing, isn't it? So even though we're saying that our young people and children and young people don't like being out of routine. It's not something that they're aware of. It's not something they will say, I really want to be back in a routine. I really want to be getting up at the same time every day, and especially not being in school, but for some of them. But that's the thing. So even though we know that that is a challenge for them and that affects them, it's not something that they're going to agree with, because it's not something that they are fully aware of, that the not having a timetable and structure to their life is something that's negatively impacting on their life.
Absolutely. I think, it'd be a strange day if a child or a teenager, come and ask you, can I go to bed at 10 tonight and can I get up at, 7? They're not going to be able to younger ones, they can't verbalize that. A lot of younger ones, they feel their needs quite instinctively, but they're not quite aware of what their needs are, and they aren't able to verbalize it. And as our kind of children get older into their teenagers, it's more of a sense of kind of, they may know it deep down, but they're ignoring it because the immediate reward of being on their phone or talking to their friends late into the night is more important to them than their kind of need for that, that structure and that safety.
Tell me a little bit more then, Caitlin. What else do you think children find challenging during the summer holidays?
Well, I think we picked up on it kind of briefly in terms of that sense of moving from one routine to a kind of lesser routine. But one thing that is a huge theme with the summer holidays is change. It is a significant change. Like you said, they go from having one experience of life from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and suddenly there becomes this kind of, well, even the change, I suppose, at the end of the term, the last 2 weeks or so, I know schools, are really trying to keep it kind of as normal as possible, but there are school trips, there are different things going on, children transitions, children leaving the schools, that type of thing. So from the time that we actually started to think about summer holidays, the time we're actually in summer holidays, there's a lot of changes going about, and that again makes children, or can make children, feel really unsafe, because again it's that loss of predictability. Things are changing and I don't know what to make of it, and I don't know what else is going to happen. Particularly, it might be more pronounced for children who've experienced trauma, loss, or disrupted attachment. Change can be really frightening for them, and especially if they found safety in school. The idea of school being taken away then can be quite distressing for them. And like I said, while my children may look forward to holidays, children with kind of traumatic experiences, thinking about those maybe in foster care, may feel heightened anxiety, difficulty trusting that they will have positive experiences, or general emotional dysregulation due to increased stress.
Okay, so there's a lot there then you've already discussed, in terms of like that structure and routine, so that kind of timetable of events during the day or even during the week. Then you mentioned there about change overall being difficult for kids. They're not having, those the same responsibilities, going to school, having that, seeing the same people, the teachers, the friends and stuff like that, and doing like academic activities, because obviously we know like don't do much of that in the summer holidays. What else do you think do our children find challenging?
I think, like you said, as part of that change, there is that potential for that social disconnect. Peer relationships and play, they're so important for our children and their development. A lot of children really appreciate that time they spend with their friends. And again, that's a guaranteed in the school day. If you've got friends in school, you know that you're going to see them at break or lunch, or if you might sit next to them in class. For children who do clubs, who've got friends in their clubs, that's another thing to be mindful of, is often clubs kind of come to an end over the summer as well. So it goes beyond school. So school really fosters our social connection and interaction, and without it, children can feel isolated. They might not be sure how to reach out. They might kind of be just, if you think about maybe when they're in primary and they're just starting to form those kind of close friendships, they might not be sure how to navigate that outside of the school kind of environment. And it's also, one thing that we do have to mention is there is an increase in sedentary behaviours and kind of an onlineness in our children's lives that is kind of, contributing to that as well. There used to be that kind of, calling people to play, isn't it? You go knock on the door and say like, oh, Mrs. Davis, can Caitlin come out to play? And my mum would send me out, but I think that isn't quite the reality of our children at the moment, in the sense of they can actually access their friends online in the sense of playing games and stuff like that, but the quality of that interaction is not going to perhaps be at the same level as maybe if they're kind of spending time outside with their friends, or really having that time for conversation and connection. So there is that risk there of maybe losing touch, and also people's schedules are very different in summer holidays. People maybe go on holiday, people maybe doing different things, depending on their family circumstances, their family life, and so it can actually be a really, really difficult thing is to actually maintain that connection, which can then cause a little bit of anxiety in that child thinking about going back to school as well. If that disconnect has happened, are they still going to be my friend? We're still going to spend time together. So there's a number of things that kind of feed into that, but that social disconnect is quite a big experience for young people.
And that kind of ties in with that social vulnerability, doesn't it? About how, actually, because they're not with their friends and, connecting with than in person on a one-to-one. But actually our children are kind of more vulnerable to being exposed to things that they wouldn't ordinarily do in order to gain that social connection, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, in a sense of we want our children to be out and about and we want them to experience things and build those connections. But unfortunately, you know, that can result in situations that can be quite harmful for our children. I'm thinking about, you know, kind of maybe county lines, drug and alcohol abuse, any sort of behaviour, fights, etc. You know, even though we want our children to be out and about and to be in these social arenas, as they get older, you know, there's those complexities that are added in, you know, that can actually make them really, really vulnerable in that social environment. And like I said, it can be really distressing and harmful, and our children can be targeted.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when we think about the impact of that on their, you know, emotional well-being, you know, it's huge, isn't it? When you think about all these things, you know, when we're thinking about, oh, thank goodness for the summer holidays, or even kids are so grateful for the summer holidays, actually. You think about changing routine, you know, the changing everything altogether, you know, not seeing their peer relationships and having that connection, be more vulnerable to other things as well, like we just talked about them.
Because, you know, even within those peer relationships, we know peer pressure is a thing. You know, we know that, you know, what they do have in summer holidays is they often have a lot of time together without maybe not so much adult supervision. And that's where things can, you know, maybe take a turn.
So tell me a little bit more about, you know, we talked about all the impact on their emotional well-being and things like that. You know, there's also that worry when it's going back to school, isn't it? You know, we find that kids are, you know, maybe they're great for the first 2 weeks, you know, where they're just really winding down from school. And we all know that in September is a start of a new year, new teachers, new academic demands and stuff like that. And I got to say that a lot of our kids start feeling that worry about going back to school quite soon, because there's a lot of things that they're worried about, maybe seeing people again that they haven't seen, you know, being back in that routine, even though, you know, they don't realize they actually thrive within a routine. You know, tell me a little bit more about, you know, that impact on them.
So there's definitely an academic element to those, that emotional kind of impact on children and people. 6 weeks is a long time to be without your lessons, you know. And if we take away the social element of school, we just purely look at the kind of academic, children do naturally, you know, will forget about things. You know, if you think about Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, you know, the kind of, you either use it or lose it, and children are not using their academic knowledge during the 6 weeks, you know. So a lot of things get forgotten, and there's our worry of, when I go back, am I going to be at the same level? Am I going to be able to catch up? In addition to that, you know, some children are going through academic transitions. So, you know, our year nines, you know, they may be thinking about actually starting their GCSEs when they go back. You know, that can be really anxiety inducing. Our year tens, you know, is kind of, they're thinking about, well, my kind of, you know, my big exams, you know, are coming up and stuff like that. Our year sixes, I'm thinking about what's year seven going to be like, you know, kind of
huge.
So there is this element of, you know, and naturally with school, there is going to be those concerns around, actually, I'm spending quite a big chunk away from my studies, and what's that going to mean for me when I actually return to them? And again, that might not be a conscious worry, and for our children, a lot of these aren't necessarily kind of things that they might be able to express to you, but, you know, it is something that's going to be kind of maybe playing on their mind naturally, like us with adults. You know, if I had 6 weeks off work, a part of that 6 weeks, I would be thinking about, what's my workload going to be like when I get back? You know, what are my colleagues still going to be friendly with me? You know, am I going to have to catch up on this? Have I missed any training that, you know? So it's a very natural and normal experience, but unfortunately just adds to that kind of emotional and well-being difficulty that comes with 6 weeks.
And I don't think it helps, does it? You know, the fact that we know that our children aren't engaging in those typical academic type, you know, opportunities. You know, they are kind of bored in their bedroom doing, usually it's on technology, you know, some form of technology. They're not out and about. You know, even, you know, the older generation will say how the streets are quiet, you know, compared to how they used to be, because of technologies keeping kids inside, you know. So there's a lot that plays into that, you know, academic anxiety we're talking about going back in September, because they literally have spent the majority of the summer holidays doing things that are quite mundane and boring, and it's not good for the brain, is it?
No, and no, that is a really good point, Cara. I was thinking about like that attentional skills, you know, like a lot of our kind of school ability, it relies on our ability to pay attention in class. And when we've got children using social media sites like, you know, TikTok, for example, where they're having those 30-second dopamine hits, you know, if you've had 6 weeks of, you know, 6 weeks is, you know, a habit really for the brain, isn't it? I think about 30 days or more. When they get into that habit of only having short, sharp bursts of information and having an immediate kind of reward by having this like dopamine hit, then actually going back to the classroom is going to initially be a really big transition, because they're now having to pay attention for 50 minutes as opposed to, you know, 30 seconds. They're not having that level of stimulation that they would have on social media, which I know is a wider issue in itself.
And as we know, you know, like all of these things that these children are going through do put pressure within the home environment, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that's one thing that, you know, again, children, may experience more of is, being in the family home, for extended periods of times, can be quite stressful altogether, can't it? And I'm thinking that ties us nicely onto,
Mm.
why do parents find it difficult?
Absolutely. The home environment, there's never so much pressure on the home environment as it is during the 6 weeks, because generally you're never all really in the same space
Yeah.
as much as you are in the 6 weeks. And that can be really difficult for our parents. We know this because our children are kind of, raring for that summer holidays. We know that is that kind of anticipatory kind of experience, that kind of, I think dread's too strong of a word, but some parents might use that one. We're thinking about what this summer holiday is going to mean, and all the pressures and the experiences the parents are going to have to navigate as part of that. So one thing is, obviously, there's an increased emotional load. We talk a lot about children's kind of emotional and well-being needs as a result of, the experience of summer holidays, and parents are absorbing that. They're absorbing those anxieties, they're absorbing that frustration, that boredom, that upset, distress. They're taking a lot of that on, and children rely a lot on co-regulation. They need adult support to help them regulate those big feelings, and this can be really exhausting for parents, considering particularly the other aspects of the summer holidays that they're having to juggle. So you have to, kind of, well, I suppose, contend with your own stress, the own things you've got going on, your children a little bit more stressed, a little bit more emotional. They got, there's kind of these experiences they're not used to or they're struggling with. And it can be really, really actually tough for
Yeah.
parents. It won't beat around the bush.
Yeah, I mean, parents who work especially,
Mhm.
being able to kind of adapt their work-life balance and
Yeah.
be able to also then look after the kids as well, that can be really challenging because, not all parents have the summer holidays off
No, they don't.
to be able to
Yeah.
entertain their children, which would be hard enough anyway, but being able having to work then as well and juggle that, especially if you work from home and your children don't go to like summer camp
Mm.
or day care, or out with their grandparents, you know, um,
We know we've got parents out there who are performing, quite frankly, logistical miracles. When you think
yeah,
about like what their planner must look like
yeah,
around finding that childcare, having time to work themselves. Children who may be doing clubs and need to be dropped off at this point, at that point, they're going over this friend's house, this friend's
yeah,
come over this point. This kind of, really, we think about the planning and the organisation that goes into summer holidays that is primarily done by
yeah.
parents. It's a lot.
Yeah, and that routine for parent is, that
Yeah.
all changes, doesn't it? And that pressure as well to kind of, so, manage your change of routine because
Yeah.
it's so difficult, isn't it, to manage your work-life balance, but also trying to, look after the kids as well. And you've got that
Yeah.
entertaining factor as well. And,
Absolutely.
I always feel guilty when I have to go to work, and I know my daughter's probably home bored, and but
Yeah.
that you get that guilt and you think I'm not doing enough because again, dare I ever look on social media and see all the other
Yeah.
parents doing amazing jobs and home baking, organic,
Oh,
homemade foods, and
hashtag making
allegedly
memories, all that sort of
working,
stuff.
and yeah, just like, well, I'm failing in every
Yeah.
aspect. But that's the problem, isn't it? It's because it to acknowledge how much there is to juggle.
Absolutely. And if there is, like you said, that absolute kind of pressure to make it special in some way, or to make memories, or for it to be this wonderful, kind of 6 weeks of experiences. And that's not sustainable for anybody.
No.
And quite frankly, the person on Instagram who's making it look like that's the case, it's not sustainable for them either, because, like I said, it's never going to be a perfect summer. For one, with the weather,
Yeah.
it's boiling leading up until the summer holidays. As soon
Yeah.
as that school bell goes and the kids are out, it's like raining, it's
Yeah.
torrential. So, I think that is really difficult for parents, is like you said, that guilt and that burnout and that financial strain as
Yeah.
well, to kind of
Trying and entertain kids when it's raining because you can't just chuck them outside, can you?
No,
know.
and even when it is nice, having those days out, or even clubs and stuff like that, comes with a financial burden. Is having to pay, what, £25, for 5 hours of football or something like
Yeah.
that. So there is that, in addition to the kind of logistics and the emotional stress, there's also that financial stress as well around. And even if you're paying for childcare, do you know what I mean? Like, it can start to add up, really.
It does, yeah.
Meals, not that we don't feed our children, I'm not saying that, but
Yeah.
when they're in school, we know that, a certain
get
amount of
lunch.
their needs. Yeah, they got their breakfast club, they got their lunch.
Yeah.
We send those snacks, or school does snacks. We've only really got to sort out tea, innit?
Yeah.
However, in the summer holidays, I've multiple parents say the children will eat you at house and home.
Oh, yeah.
They're growing children, they're developing
Yeah.
children, and a lot of them, like you said, it's that boredom. And
Yeah.
I'm terrible. If I'm bored, I'm the first in the fridge. And
Yeah.
kids are the same.
Yeah.
They just kind of, it is a lot of financial and logistical stress.
And you can see then when you think about these things, all these things for parents to have to deal with, you can see now then why, us as parents, we kind of do the things kids and have a meltdown sometimes, just because like we can't
Absolutely, yeah.
get this all together, can't pay for it all, can't
Yeah.
organize it all and do my job and and that parental guilt that you've got driving all of this. It's really tricky.
It is really tricky. And, with all the best will in the world, we all love our children. But when you're spending 24 hours a day with them, over 6 weeks, suddenly, that the kind of, as a parent, it can kind of be really challenging, you know, when you're kind of, like you said, you get to a point where you're thinking, my goodness, please, let school start again, you know. You don't need to feel guilty for that, 'cause like I said, it's a very normal and natural experience around, it is challenging, and there's a spotlight put on family in the summer holidays, and there's a lot of pressure because it's the most time you spend together.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me then, come on, there must be something that we can do to help make it that little bit better, Caitlin.
Absolutely. So we can kind of, with again, we'll split into two. So we look at children first. So we think about like a loss of structure and routine, again, just creating a loose daily schedule. And I'm not saying it has to be kind of like school or regimented,
Okay.
but have a look having, consistent wake up times, consistent meal times and bed times, If you can, kind of let your children know when you're going to be doing something, that's really helpful as well, just kind of saying, well, if you do things like visual timetables, that might be helpful. You don't have to, but just having that general idea of how that day is going to look,
Yeah.
and preparing our children if there may be any changes,
Yeah.
that can just be really, really helpful. But the one thing I would stress is the consistent wake up and go to bed times, because that's going to help their sleep, and that's only going to help their regulation.
And I want to mention something here, which I think is really important for parents of children who are old enough to use devices, is certainly put a time limit on those, because what we're finding is that kids these days, okay, yeah, they may be waking up by 10 a.m., but actually from 10 a.m. till dinner time, they're on their devices.
Yeah.
And those are the key hours that they need to be outdoors, getting vitamin D, building up that melatonin so that they can sleep properly through the night, all helping without those, central brain processes that need to go on during sleep. And again, like we've got Tonai talks on tackling technology and sleep. So I think it's just helpful to think about those and how they impact on our children, because it's huge. Technology and sleep are some of the most detrimental things to our children and young people if they're not, managed appropriately. And I think in the summer holidays, those two things, technology and sleep, they run their own rules in a way. And I think, what you're saying about having, waking times and general kind of sleep times, I think that's great, as well as then restricting the amount of hours they're spending on their devices.
Absolutely, and it's only going to be helpful when you get to the end of the summer holidays, because when they're thinking about going back to school, you're going to be thinking about putting them back in those routines anyway, or you should be, because we want to get them ready for what's coming, prepare their bodies, their circadian rhythms. So if you keep them in somewhat of a consistent, waking and going to bed kind of schedule, then that's only going to take the stress off that anyway, because they're going to be in that routine as it is. I'm not saying it has to be perfect every day. No, it's not going to be. There's going to be perhaps an event you do where you're up a little bit later, or but generally, if you try and keep that, you have somewhat an idea of when you're getting up and when you're going to sleep, that's only going to be helpful and supportive in the long term.
Like, so what else are we thinking in terms of supporting our kids? Now, you mentioned about that structure and routine. Am I guessing that it's going to be talking about change? Because I'm feeling that we're identifying the things that they find difficult, as you did discuss now, Caitlin. So you're going to give us some strategies for each one of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So with change, the main thing, we can't stop change. We can't. There is going to be an element of change in all of our lives at any given time in our lives, because life is at its finest unpredictable. What we can do is we can have conversations about change, when change happens, how it makes us feel, why we might feel that way, some things that can help us with that. It's really good to be open with our children about that, as you can say, actually, do you know what, I have found it quite difficult going from, being on a 9 to 5 job to, me and you every day, and not really sure what we're doing sometimes. And, talk about what can be helpful there, what's going to make that a little bit easier for them. And the thing is where you can prepare children for changes so they know what to expect, particularly with our younger ones, coming up to the summer holidays and coming up to going back to school. There's a lot of conversations around what's going to happen, what might be different, why that might be different, what we can do about that, getting them ready, because it takes some of the fear out. So the difficulty with change is the anxiety often comes around the uncertainty. So what's this change going to mean for me? When we talk about change and we prepare for change, it takes away some of that uncertainty, which takes away some of those worried feelings as well.
Okay, so I'm assuming those changes then, as much as we want to be able to help our children to become flexible and resilient to cope with things changing and altering, we also want to support them so that it's not causing such a discomfort for them in that way.
Absolutely. And
so I think if you can give them as much notice as possible, but it's about explaining, it's about validating, isn't it? Because you know what, I know you're really looking forward to doing this today, but unfortunately, we just can't manage it. I know it was important. Let's plan to do it another
Yeah,
day.
that's
It's
perfect.
very understanding. And
Yeah,
they've explained to, and help to
yeah,
understand that that these things do happen out of our
yeah.
control.
And think about, with it being age appropriate as well. For our littler ones, again, visuals can be really, really helpful. So
Mm.
having that kind of family diary where they can see, and counting down, well, in 1, 2, 3 days we're going to Nana's, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That can be, helpful for
Yeah.
them. To be honest with teenagers, they're so forgetful. It might be helpful to have
Yeah,
that as
no,
well.
I think everyone could do with a visual timetable.
Absolutely. Yeah, just refer to the family
Yeah,
schedule and all
yeah.
will be sorted.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit more about how do we help them with it, like that social disconnection that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so this can be quite a tricky one, and again, it depends on the age of our children, because when they're little, we can do things like organise play dates, and we can kind of, should we meet up in the park and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Go to community activities, go to like fun days and stuff like that to kind of facilitate those social, connections.
Mm.
But when they get a little bit older, and those social relationships become a little bit more independent, that
And they don't want to
can
hang out with
be,
their parents
and
as
they
well,
don't want
because
to.
they, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're kind of relying on them to instigate that connection with their
Yeah.
peers. That can be a little bit more tricky because, with a 15-year-old, I can't, really say, can't text their friends' parents
No.
and say, can they come for a play date? So again, it's around, just maybe just encouraging, having those conversations on, oh, I noticed you haven't been out with the boys for a bit, or, what's happening there? Have
Yeah.
you given them a text? How are they? How's so and so, or stuff like that. Encouraging social time. Staying.
And I think, Caitlin, that's got a lot more to do. Like, I find boys don't do that in instigated
Yeah,
social kind of get-togethers, do they? As well as girls. I think teenage girls are quite well connected
yeah,
sometimes, aren't they? And they do tend to arrange more to be together. Whereas I think sometimes boys need an excuse, like, oh, let's go to the gym together, or let's
yes,
practice football together, or let's hire tennis courts together, or whatever it be, or
yeah,
go down the park and do the skateboarding. I think in a way sometimes with teenage boys they need an excuse,
yeah.
a reason, and sometimes all their organizational skills aren't as well developed as
Yeah.
teenage girls sometimes.
And it may be like kind of what you would do with younger children, where you verbally talk into that problem
Yeah.
solving. You may, do that with your teenager in a sense
Yeah.
of, oh, I know you haven't seen the boys for a bit. Oh, what's happening then? Are they
Yeah.
available? Or remember that last time you went to skate park and you really
Yeah.
enjoyed it? I wonder is a lovely
Yeah.
statement, by the way, if you can use that whenever.
Yeah, because you're not bossing them around.
No,
You're just
no.
setting the
I
scene.
wonder if if that skate park's open. Oh, right, okay. I wonder if if you text the boys if they fancy going with you. So it might just be kind of verbally talk, a little bit of gentle parent prompting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just to kind of get those cogs turning in the brain.
Yeah.
But also as well, they have a connection with you. So stay connected with them as well as a parent, or a carer. And small moments of connection go a long way. Even if you go for like a little drive together, or you go for a little walk, they can, ultimately, depending on their age, our teenagers, they're going to want that peer connection. But they're also going to want that connection with you as well,
Yeah.
because this is kind of the most time they have with this is a time of the year where both of you you're at your most accessible. So take advantage of that and spend some time together. And like I said, I just want to refer again to what Cara said about technology. Encourage those offline goals, set clear boundaries around, time limits and phone usage, but also model healthy tech habits yourself.
Yeah. And that ties in with that social vulnerability that we're talking about.
Mm,
Technology and those healthy habits, and knowing kind of, is it appropriate for you to, accept a friend request off
yeah,
someone you don't know? Because unfortunately, as we know with things like Snapchat, people can find you in their local area
yeah, they
and
can
request to
map,
be your
yeah,
friend. So it's important that we help our children to be aware of these things. So even though it's normal because it is Snapchat and they'll find their friends on the maps, just because someone in your local area is, requested for you to be their, so-called friend, it's important that children know the risks, isn't it?
absolutely. Knowledge is power, and having those conversations around, having those open dialogues about keeping themselves safe, and educating them on certain topics is only going to help them in terms of their vulnerability. It's going to help them to understand what risks are and, who might be out there and why they might want to take advantage of them and stuff like that. So keeping that, and that open dialogue is good as well, because if you're, kind of approaching it in an open way, your children are also going to feel more able to talk to you about these things and
Absolutely.
raise their own concerns.
And
And
that's so important when thinking about
yeah,
their well-being, isn't it?
absolutely.
Noticing those changes in them and being
Yeah.
open to, so that they can talk to you about things that maybe they're a little bit ashamed of, embarrassed about,
Mm,
unsure about, knowing that when they do raise these questions with you, that you're going to listen and not shout, and you're going to listen and not judge. And it's a tricky one, isn't it?
yeah.
Because parents and children are from different generations, and I
Yes, they
think
are.
it's important that we try and be as flexible with the way that we think, for the benefit of our children.
And also, maintain those boundaries and enforce them where needed. At the end of the day, if they are engaged in a way that's unsafe, put those boundaries in place to keep them safe
Mm.
as parents. But like I said, that open dialogue is so important for a lot of things, those the emotional needs as well, validating and talking about experiences
Mm.
is going to be, really helpful for children during this time. Thinking about extending to the academic anxiety, having conversations about that is going to be helpful. One thing you can do, and bear with me here, is if you wanted to do a bit of light learning, maybe do a bit of reading or some kind of educational games or kind of creative projects, that might be helpful in terms of keeping some skills kind of up to date and keeping that knowledge base. However, I do recognise the kind of I can't think of the word, the pushback you're going to have on that for your children, maybe.
But sometimes, I mean, gosh, when it was the summer holidays for me, my daughter, she'd love helping me, like laminating things, printing things out.
Arts and crafts.
Oh my gosh, yeah, feeling important to have a
Baking.
job, So, gosh, if you have a job where they can kind of like be helpful in that way, that's great. And, like with our teenagers, I say, look, let's think about what we want for food this week, can you do me a shopping list? These are all essential skills for them to help you with. And also keeps their brain ticking of like, okay, planning, organization, budgeting, let them cook your dinner,
Depending on how brave you are.
Yeah, it starts off not so good, and now, it does end up being really good the more you give them practice, But that's being that flexible and allowing that creativity, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like I said, there's a number of activities you can do with your children, that they don't necessarily have to cost anything or have to kind of, be this big perfect event. There's a kind of a number of them.
What kind of activities do you have in mind, Caitlin?
So, it depends on what you and your child are interested in. But, in terms of like creative activities, art projects, like we said just now, art and crafts are always nice, bit of painting, bit of collage. You can get those clay kits, have you seen them? You just have to like fry them in a kiln or nothing, you just let them dry. Or, making things, journaling or scrapbooking. That can be a really nice way of kind of commemorating the time you've spent together over the 6 weeks, is putting together a little, like scrapbook, story writing, or comic creation, and building a fort or den, which is a kind of an old school classic,
everyone
that
loves
is,
a
isn't
fort,
it? Yeah. Maybe have a little like film night in your little den and stuff. Lovely. Outdoor activities can be really important because, thinking back what you said, Cara, around getting that kind of vitamin D, build up that melatonin. We want our children to be spending some time outside. Things you can do are like nature scavenger hunts, finding leaves and bugs and rocks and all those kind of like mucky things like the kids love, don't they? A bit of gardening, plant flowers, herbs or vegetables, riding bikes.
Kids do enjoy that because
absolutely.
in lockdown, we had a patch of, the front garden was like a mess. So it was like, we decided to turn that into a, a little veg plot, and like, it was incredible the things that did grow,
Yeah.
But it's like it's quite fun in a way doing things like that, and you feel part of it, it's like something to be proud of.
Absolutely. It's a rewarding experience. And when we're thinking about perhaps those long-term kind of, we're talking about attention, with dopamine, it is kind of like a rewarding hormone, isn't it? And it's kind of, you've worked hard, you've achieved something, and that's going to help them with that. It's going to give them a good kick of kind of natural dopamine. Picnics are lovely, bike rides, hikes, all sort of stuff. Learning through play, cooking, baking, DIY science experiments, building challenges, your Lego, that type of stuff.
So you see a lot of those DIY science experiments online, don't you? Some of them are fake.
Yes, they are. Yeah. Make sure you're safe. Yeah.
Be careful with the ones that need the microwave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Social and emotional, your gratitude jar, writing things down you're thankful for, mindfulness walks, those type of things. And
things with, sorry, Caitlin, things with
brilliant.
gratitude jars, they are so important because what our brain tells us we listen to, we look out for, okay? So if you're being grateful for these things, showing gratitude for what you already have, that is going to change your mindset into being a far happier person with what you've already got.
Oh, absolutely.
Because so many of our kids are wanting to be a YouTuber and wanting to have these, lives where, they've seen on TikTok and Instagram where these people have, loads of money and they're really happy, and it's like, well, it's so important to be grateful for what they do have, because a lot of these people on Instagram living those, fake lives, they're not happy.
No.
And I think it's really important for our kids is to be grateful for what they do have, as little as that might be, but it ultimately gives them that sense of positive well-being.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
Oh,
Instead
absolutely.
of always seeking for what they don't have.
Yeah. And for you as a parent as well, is kind of, it can be really kind of empowering for you because, with all the best in the world, you could kind of plan like, the best day out ever. And they might write down their gratitude, or their favourite part was singing along to their favourite song in the car with you, So you, as a parent, you might be shocked at actually the little things and the little moments are actually making such a huge impact on our children. But yeah, and calm and quiet time is a nice one as well, like reading nooks, puzzles or mazes, yoga and stretching, and maybe listening to a bit of music or an audiobook or kind of a screen-free kind of option.
There's lots of lovely things there, and there's lots of things that you would do with your child. It's not,
Mm.
even though there are things there that the children can do by themselves whilst you're working
Yeah.
and doing what you need to do, but there's a lot there that you can do with them.
Absolutely.
I just wonder what else can parents do in order to help them
Yeah.
survive the challenges of
Oh,
the 6 weeks?
100%. If a parent, it's being mindful, I think, about your own well-being, isn't it? And how you feeling and how you coping with the pressures of what's going on. When we think about that increased emotional load, building quiet time for both you and your child, emotional regulation does start with self-care. You can never be more calm than a child. So make sure you've got space to regulate your own emotions, to have some quiet time for yourself,
Mhm.
a little bit of respite. It is intense and it's
Mhm.
important you take some time for you. In terms of the routine, again, it's very similar to with the children, having a flexible kind of daily routine, thinking about when you're going to get up, thinking about, when, you're going to go to bed and, what's going to happen in your day is going to be really helpful as well. Focusing on connection over perfection is going to be really helpful, so, having those small meaningful moments, they matter more than big outings. They
Yeah,
do,
they
like I
do.
said, you'd be surprised at what your child takes away from a day with you.
Yeah.
And I know it's easier said than done, but please try and not compare yourself to others and their situations, because you're only ever seeing your perspective of someone else's situations or what they want you to see.
Yeah.
So good enough is good enough. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be a perfect summer. The odds are nobody's having a perfect summer, and
Mm.
it's just about finding that connection with your child, so please don't feel pressure in that sense. If there's a financial and kind of logistic stress, seek out free or low cost community resources, and don't be afraid to reach out for support, from loved ones or local services, and prioritize small pockets of personal time.
Okay.
So, like, give yourself permission to pause. It's okay to be like, I need a few minutes for myself, even 10 minutes of a walk or, a bit of quiet, or even like a cup of tea
Yeah.
in bed. And if you
Peaceful.
get 10 minutes earlier in the morning and you just have your, like, cup of tea or cup of coffee, in bed,
The house is quiet.
house is quiet,
Yeah.
maybe go sit out, if by some miracle we have some sun this summer,
Yeah.
if you can find, 10 minutes in the morning just to have the sun on your face,
Yeah.
that
Lovely.
just to kind of set yourself up for the day as well. Or if it's at the end of the day, to unwind from that day as well. Like I said, there's a lot on you as a parent. So please, find that time for yourself to look after your well-being and practice self-compassion. I think it's really hard for parents, like you said, there's always that element of guilt, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
So, when things are hard, remind yourself you are doing your best. And like I said earlier, good enough is good enough.
Yeah.
You're doing a fantastic job. Please be kind to yourself. And one thing, particularly where children might be challenging, we know that because of big emotions, like asthma children can have difficult experiences. Reflect, don't react. When tensions arise, pause and think, what's really going on here for me and my child?
Yeah.
And having a chat through and trying to process those emotions. Because there is conflict in
Yeah.
summer holidays. There's going to be, like I said, it's a pressure cooker. You're all
Mm.
spending lots of time together. You've all got your own stuff going on, and ultimately, it is going to boil over at some points. But it's the way in which you handle that,
Yeah.
isn't it? And have a think about actually what you're all experiencing, why this might have happened, and what might stop it from happening next time.
Mhm. And if you feel you're not in the space to be able to do that, you're clearly elevated. Do you know what I mean? If you
Absolutely, yeah.
can't stop and reflect and just, take a minute, that is a clear sign that you need to take a
Oh,
minute.
absolutely. And it's okay to communicate that.
Yeah.
If you've got a partner, you can say, can I just go out for a walk? Can I go out for a drive?
Yeah. Can you help me with the
Yeah,
kids right now because I just
absolutely.
need 5,
Yeah. Or
And
if
that's far better than the children seeing you dysregulated.
absolutely, or if got to ring kind of, loved ones, grandparents and stuff,
Yeah.
or a friend, trusted friend, and say, the kids for an hour or something, so I
Yeah.
can, that's okay to reach out. I think a
Yeah,
lot of us hold
absolutely.
that sense of, again, we don't want to give others the view that we're not kind of handling it or in control, and oh my goodness, we all need respite,
Yeah.
it's so important. So please reach out if you need to.
Yeah. Thank you, Caitlin. That's really
Okay.
helpful. I'm just wondering if there's any other activities or support that, especially in our local area of Neath Talbot, do you know of anything that could be helpful
Yeah,
for parents?
absolutely. So I just want to put some things out there. Money Saving Central has and I'll put all the links of everything I spoke about now in the description below. Okay, so all of that's going to be there. So go and check that out as and when you want to or need to. But Money Saving Central has a really lovely infographic on where kids can eat free this summer. You might have seen it on Facebook. It always does the rounds every year. It's really, really helpful. Some examples on there is like Harvester, where kids eat for £1 Monday to Friday via the app. Morrison's is on there, Zzz's, the kind of different kind of restaurants and places have different like deals or kind of
Okay.
things. One thing I will say is please be mindful that some of the offers come with kind of stipulations, like I said, with kind of the children kind of can eat for so much pound or for free if something else is bought. So just
Yeah.
make sure you're aware of that before you go. And double check the web page as well. But yeah, we'll put the link to that. NPT Pass is the Neath Talbot Physical Activity and Sports Service. They're a great hub of information. We're finding like various sports clubs or activities taking place over the summer. So we'll put a link to their Facebook and Instagram page. Kind of at the NPT web pages, you can have a look on, for places you want to visit and see what's going on NPT. And just more generally, if you're kind of interested in going somewhere, say Margam Park, the web pages always have, excellent information on what's going on and, what you might want to do. Schools are always a great kind of hub of information, and have a chat with them about things that might be, happening, things that they're aware of. I know a lot of schools share stuff on their social media anyway. So
runs the clubs.
Yeah, so have a little look at that. And then when we're thinking about children and things that might be helpful for them in coping. These are more general ones, but Childline has a really lovely page for young people on coping with summer holidays. Young Mind has some lovely pages on like mental health support. Mind has a page for parents, looking at supporting parents in the summer holidays. You can always access Tidy Mind, which tells you about kind of the support that's out there in Neath Talbot and in Swansea as well, if you're listening in Swansea. And Platform has a lovely page about NPT families, so seeing what support you can access there. So like I said, and there's the Neath Talbot Family Information Service. So yeah, have a look at those kind of web pages, check them out, see if there's anything that kind of interests you or would be helpful, and go from there, really.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. There's some lovely things there, eating out, that's always a treat, but also to be more cost effective. And yeah, I think it's really helpful to have the different, services available. And like you said, you'll put the links in the description there. So, that's really great in helping survive those 6 week holidays. So thank you. But I do need to ask, what about the inevitable, going back to school? Yeah. Because these 6 weeks holidays, they do stretch for a long time.
They do.
And we know it can be really tricky when September's looming, there's the mad rush to get the uniforms and the school shoes and the bags. And, so that's going on. I know, there's a lot of supermarkets that do some really good deals on school uniforms and shoes. So make sure you,
shop around.
Shop around, but get in there quick because I've left it too late before and everything's been sold out.
Yeah.
But, try and get in it early, get yourself prepared for the inevitable, which is September coming. What else can we do, Caitlin?
Well, so we'll keep this kind of brief because I know that we're going to have another talk on in more depth. But yeah, so understand what's going on emotionally. So try and kind of tune in with your child. What might they be feeling? Are they feeling anxious, sad, excited, or a mixture? And think about how you can kind of how that's going to impact how they're acting. We talk about like change and uncertainty, and how that's going to kind of impact them emotionally, and how maybe it'd be helpful for you to support that as a parent. Talking about open dialogue again.
Reintroduce. I was going to say, so a lot of our kids can be reluctant to talk about their feelings in school when the summer holidays have hit. They did like shut off and they don't want to talk about it, and that's tricky then. So some of our parents who are like trying to talk to their child about, say, oh, you're going up to secondary school in September and they don't want to talk about it. I think it's about picking the right time as well sometimes.
Yeah.
And maybe saying something along the lines of, do you know what? I know that it's a big thing, it's a huge thing, and I'd be worried too. And I was worried when I was, going up to year 7. And I'm here, ready whenever you want to talk about it.
Yeah,
we can do to prepare, isn't it?
100%. Keep our children in routines and introduce those kind of stricter routines gradually, kind of when we're getting them ready for school, considering again those bedtimes, waking up times, meal times, screen limits, that type of thing, Talk about what to expect. It goes back to that open dialogue, validate, acknowledge their emotions. It's okay to feel however they feel. Although here, we don't want to reinforce fears or worries, okay? We can understand they can feel them, but we don't necessarily want to feed into them, we don't want to make those worse before they go back to school. And you might look at some transition activities, perhaps looking at their timetable, preparing their uniform or school bag, driving past school, getting them ready, kind of refamiliarising them with their school routine and their school life.
And I got to say, you had some really helpful hints and tips in our previous ton I talk about getting my kids to school.
Yeah.
Where you mentioned about the summer holidays, because we know this can be really tricky, especially if you've got a child that is already quite, finds attending school quite difficult anyway. When the 6 weeks holidays come, it really does set a lot of our kids back quite significantly. So have a listen to that podcast if you think, it applies to your child, because it is tough. The 6 weeks holidays are really tough for our kids, let alone the ones that already struggle to attend school. And I think, talking about that, Caitlin, about what to expect, driving past the school and things like that, refamiliarising them with that environment. It's so important. Linking in with their friends from their class. It all quite helpful, really.
Absolutely. You might want to think about creating a back to school rituals. It could be like choosing a new pencil case or lunchbox. So when the children know when this happens, they know they're getting close to stand back, making a maybe first day breakfast or drawing and talk about their hopes for the year. watching for signs of distress or stress and supporting accordingly. And I suppose just staying connected. They're gonna find separating from you quite difficult at first. So, you might want to leave a little note in their lunchbox, plan a special after school activity,
Yeah,
and
that
just
always
keep,
helps. Yeah.
yeah, keep communication open.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really helpful on the first day of school to have something nice planned for afterwards that they've got
Yeah,
to look forward to.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a big transition going back to school.
It is, and like we said, it's a transition fraught with a lot of perhaps worries and thoughts and kind of things that there's a lot going on for them
Yeah.
prior to that transition back into school.
Thank you, Caitlin. This has been really helpful, and I know it'll be great for a lot of our parents that are listening live, and certainly those that will catch it now on YouTube. Just as usual with our Tonic Talks, so tell me, what would be your top tips?
So I think they're pretty straightforward. My top tips, one, create a predictable routine. Kind of like I said, those bedtimes, those waking up times is so important. Understand there's flexibility within it, but ultimately try and stay in some form of a routine. Number two, support your child's social and emotional needs. Be there. It's like we said, there's a lot of difficulty there. Making sure that you're having that open dialogue, you're keeping communication open, and you're talking through their feelings. Promote safety and boundaries. This isn't kind of this can be tricky in such kind of a unpredictable time, but making sure you stay in, sticking to your boundaries and having those conversations about how children can stay safe, whether that be online or offline. Focus on connection over perfection. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. It doesn't have to be perfect. Good enough is good enough. And finally, be mindful of your needs and self-care. And this brings me to kind of my take home message. There's a lovely little image there from Mind Charity, which highlights for me the importance of taking care of your needs and making sure you prioritize your well-being, because ultimately you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it takes a lot out of us for summer holidays. So make sure you topping up that cup, because it's important that you take care of your well-being and that you feel okay so that you can support your children.
Absolutely. Thank you, Caitlin. That's a lovely take-home message.
Oh,
Okay, well, thank you very much, Caitlin. That was a really informative session. I really enjoyed hearing all those top tips, which I'm going to try out as well.
yeah.
So thank you all. Diolch yn fawr for joining us today for our Tonic Talk from the 5 and the 6 weeks. Don't forget, there's our QR code there for you to scan so that you can gain access to our next live sessions, but also have access to our other Tonic Talks, which are on YouTube. Take care, enjoy the 6 weeks, and we'll see you back in September.
Diolch yn fawr, everyone.